it's Darryl Syms, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how awesome and useful spread voice triads are, and more specifically how Eric Johnson uses them in his playing. And we're particularly going to be studying his live intro for the song Cliffs of Dover. It's the really popular video that pretty much every guitar player would have seen on YouTube at some point or other. And in this video, I'm not only going to show you how to play this particular section of the piece, but I'm also going to try and give you some insight to why the notes work, what's going on, and perhaps Eric's thought process when creating this. Now, in order to thoroughly understand everything that I'm going to talk about in this video, you need to be familiar with two topics, and that's spread voiced triads or open voice triads and drop two chords. So let's real briefly expand on this. A spread voice triad or open voice triad is simply a triad that extends beyond one octave. So a triad in its basic form would look something like this, where we have the three intervals, 1, 3, and 5 within one single octave. Now to make this a spread voice triad, we need to choose one of these intervals and just push it up or down to the next or previous octave. So perhaps we could take the third degree there, bring it back an octave, and that would give us a new voicing for the same chord, but it sounds a bit more interesting because it spans over the course of 2 octaves. So that's one example of a spread voice triad. The second term that I mentioned was a drop 2 chord. This is a similar kind of thing depending on how you look at it, except it's a bit more specific than just bringing any of the intervals up and down an octave. Because in specific, we're going to be moving the second highest interval, hence the name, drop 2. So the second highest interval in this triad would be this one here, because this is the highest, that's the next highest. And then we drop that back an octave. And conveniently it creates the same chord. So this is a drop 2 voicing of this triad. So there you go, that's a basic summary of what we're going to be talking about in this lesson. Hopefully as we go along you'll become more familiar with this if you're not already. And just before we crack on with the main chunk of the video, tabs for what I'm about to show you are available on my Patreon, which is linked in the description below. And if you want to learn more about music theory and chord construction, then please consider checking out my Essential Theory for Guitarist course, which is also linked in the description below. Alrighty, so let's check this out. We're going to start this particular piece off by playing a G5 power chord in a very interesting way. It's not going to be a traditional power chord. We have this kind of thing. So that's 5 on the D string, 0 on the G, and then 3, 3 on the bottom 2. And we're going to pinch that and have that drone in the background whilst we play everything else. And to do that, you're going to need a delay pedal, or perhaps if you have a keyboard or something, you know, you can just play a G5 and have that ring out behind what you're doing. Now let's move on from there. So we have followed by, so that's just 2 minor sixths there. Perhaps over the G, you could think of the first as a G major 7, because you've got the root, the 7, and then the 5 there. Followed by this here, which could be one of two things. I mean, it could be a major 6 sus4, because you've got the major 6 and then the sus4 on the first fret there of the B string. Or it could perhaps be an inversion of C, because if we have a C spread voice triad here, where we have the root 5 and then the 3, and we invert that so that the 5th degree leads, so then we have 5, 3, 1. Same chord, just different voicing. Or he could just perhaps be thinking, okay, you know, there's some sixths available, which all sound beautiful over this G5 power chord, which is probably the more realistic one, because sometimes it's best not to overthink things and just play what you're comfortable with. Anyway, from here, let's move on. So we have this selection of chords here. We're going to slide into another G chord. This is a spread voice triad. We have the intervals 1, 5, and 3 there, followed by a D. Now you might think, how is that a D? We have the 9 on the A, 12 on the D, and 10 on the B. The little finger is actually the leading note here. This is an inversion of a D triad. You could actually think of this as a drop 2 inversion, because all we're doing is taking that 3rd degree down from this triad shape to give us that chord shape. And this particular chord shape is one that Eric uses all the time. It's actually one of my favorite chord shapes. It has such a beautiful voicing. So you'll see a lot of that during this piece. And remember, the little finger is the root note. So that's a D, therefore we know that this is a D major triad. Similarly, if we move on to our next chord, which is the same shape, but on the 14th fret. Remember, the little finger is the leading note here, which implies that this is a G. And then the next chord, so that's 10A, 9G, 8E. And it looks kind of complicated to get your head around. You might be thinking, what is that? Well, actually it's quite simple. If we bring that first finger up to the top string, that might look a lot more familiar to you, because that actually represents our typical bar chord E shape, which implies that this is a C triad. We're leading with a 5th interval, so we have 5, 3, 1. And then to finish, we go back to the G. So once again, we have moving onwards, we have the following 4 chords. Very beautiful, because there's barely any difference between the two pairs, which gives the chords a lot of common ground. We have a minor triad shape here to begin with on the 7th fret of the A. This is a very familiar A shape. We have the 1, the 5, and the minor 3rd there. And then we're going to bring that 5 up to the next tone, which doesn't necessarily make it a minor sharp 5 chord. This is a familiar shape that we've already done, and remember the little finger leads here, which implies that this is a C triad. And then we're going to come all the way down here to the 2nd fret and play the same shape. Then shift that first finger up. Now the first one, as we know, the little finger leads, so that's a G triad. But the second one is actually a C sus2. And this might be somewhat familiar to you if I play this chord. We have the root, the 5, and then this one is the sus2 there. After this section, we have that chord sequence there. So we're going to come back to the G triad here, and then down to the 7th fret here, playing this familiar shape, which is a C, up 2 frets, playing a D, back to the G. We have an A minor triad shape here, your familiar A minor shape, just playing those 3 notes. And then, now this is again the familiar shape that we've been playing a lot of. Remember the little finger leads, so that's on the G note there. So this is just a different voicing for your G there. And then we have this one here, which is another C triad. It's just an octave up from, we have your 1, your 5, and your 3. And then we finish here on the E. So we have 1, 5, and minor 3 again, making this an E minor triad. This is a particularly interesting chord sequence actually, because we're ascending, which, you know, brings it up to a climax, but then we're coming down to the relative minor of G, which is of course your E minor to resolve. Onwards from here we have, which are just 2 very common spread voiced major triad shapes here, representing your E bar chord shape. And then, so that's kind of interesting there. We have this beautiful suspended 4 shape, which consists of your root note, your root again on the D string, little finger on the next string, that's your sus4, and then your 5th degree there. And we're just going to play the root note and use these 2 fingers on the G and the B strings there. So we're not actually playing that D, but it feels very comfortable to just put your 3rd finger there anyway. And then we resolve that from the sus4 to the major 3rd there, whilst hanging on to that root note. And then open D, and then 3 at the bottom. Now this is interesting because when you watch the video, his fingers look something like this. And I think what he did was he intended to play this chord shape, but then he didn't want to take the chance because there's a bit of tension in this shape compared to your original G major chord, because within this shape you have the following notes, which sounds beautiful, but these 2 in particular are very clashy, so it's a bit risky doing this over that G. So we have that sus4. You see, when I play all that together, it does sound beautiful, but as I said, I think Eric kind of was a bit unsure, so he played it safe and just played the open D and then that 3 at the bottom, which still sounds equally as beautiful. Now, in case you're wondering why these notes would even fit over that G or even over that D, depending on how you look at it and which one you're going to consider the root note here, there's a few ways you can think about this, but I think the most realistic is that he intended to follow up from the G sus4 with just another voicing for the same chord. Because this is also a beautiful G sus4 voicing. We have the root, the major third, the sus4 there, which is the 1st fret on the B, and then of course your root note again. And that D note, that's the 5th degree of G, which just implies that it's a sus4 voicing, but with the 5th degree leading that. So that's just something for you to think about there. It's interesting to see his transition or his thought process between, you know, the two voicings. And then after this, we go right up to the opposite side of the neck, and we have the following pattern. So that's kind of interesting. I think the first note he tried to get the pinch harmonic on the next octave above that, and to do that, if you look closely over here, I'm using the 1st finger to play the harmonic and then obviously the picks behind that, which gives you that kind of sound. And it's tricky to find the right place. The idea is that you need to go 12 frets above that, but I think what Eric did is he tried to do that, it didn't quite work. He slid back 1 fret from 20 to 19, and then tried the same thing on the D string here, which is the 17, and that one came through, which sounds great. So again, that's just 12 frets above the 17th fret here. Elaborating on this phrase, we have slide, harmonic, A string, and then G string, and you're just going to let all of these notes sustain over each other. After this, we jump back down to the opposite side of the neck once again, and we're going to play the following chord. This is a beautiful chord. This is an absolutely beautiful voicing, which I believe is a C of some sort. We have the root note here, root 5, root, there's your 2, and then this is your major 6 at the bottom, and we fatten that up a bit by barring with the 1st finger and actually playing that G on the top string, which is the 5th degree. So you're leading with the 5. You have all of those notes. It requires a lot of squeezing there, and you're going to want to let that chord sustain for a little bit before the next picked melody, which is. So that's quite a simple picked melody there, and that leads us nicely onto the next chord, which is a D sus4, and then moving on from that, we jump up here to the 13th fret, and we have, which is another interesting picked melody here, where we're going to use the pick to lead, and then the 2nd finger there to help you with the rest. And then we finish on this beautiful descent here, where we have so we start off with, interestingly, this E flat sus2 shape. Should be relatively familiar with you. We're just obviously isolating that into its spread voiced triad. We have the root, the 5, there's your 2. Now this is interesting because I think this actually comes from a major chord. Okay, that would be the most correct sounding one over that G, except this major chord does not belong to G major. E flat major is not in the key of G major. It's actually in the key of G minor, which makes this a great example of substituting a chord with its parallel key. So we go from this shape here, and then pick the 4 and the 3 on the B string, followed by, so that there is our G sus4, but we're not going to play this root note at the top. So we're going to go, just playing that double stop in the middle there, that's a 5 and a 5, before the 3 on the next string, and then we have 2 chords, which is a C into a G, and we're just playing with these 2 fingers, the G and the B string, and then the pick's got the root note covered. So once again, all together there. Beautiful. And that concludes that entire piece before he goes onto the lead section. So I hope that gave you a little bit of insight into not only how to play this piece, but also actually understanding kind of what's going on here. And I think this piece is a great demonstration of the topic of the video, which is spread voice triads and drop 2 voicings. Since we did learn a few different voicings here, pretty much the majority, if not at least 90% of this, are based on spread voiced triads. And these are obviously particularly beautiful chords, which you can pretty much throw any of these in any order and it's going to sound amazing. So there you have it. That's just about everything that I want to share with you in this video. If you want to learn more about spread voice triads and how you can use them in your own playing and improvisation and songwriting, then stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you got that notification bell switched on, because very soon I'm going to be posting almost a follow-up to this video where I talk more in depth about what spread voice triads are and how you can use them in your own playing to expand your chord vocabulary and inspire you to come up with some different options that you perhaps might not have thought of before. So until next time, I will see you in the next video.